All right, welcome to the Standing Committee on Finance for Tuesday, January 18th, 2022. I want to start off by just quickly taking a brief moment of silence for Robert McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy was had quite a few roles and responsibilities as a public servant, but he served as a state senator and a register of probate for Plymouth County, and he was a very good friend of the city of Brockton. So just a moment of silence, if you will. All right, thank you. Also want to welcome our new assistant clerk for the Finance Committee, Taylor. With that, Madam Clerk, item number 1.
Appointment of Henry Soons of Brockton, Mass. 02302 to the Council on Aging for a 3-year term ending January 2025. Invited Henry Soons.
You can come on up. If there's anything you'd like to say, the floor is yours.
Okay, just very, very briefly, I was here, in front of this committee a year ago via Zoom. I've been serving for a year, and it's been quite an experience. I wish things were happening more in person at the COA than they are, but that'll be coming in the future. So I thank you for, the ability for me to serve.
Thank you. Councilor Castro.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Mr. Soons. Thank you for being here. I just wanted to make a few remarks. It's my pleasure to consider the nomination of someone from Ward 4, mighty Ward 4. You've lived here for 35 years. You're an engineer by training. I'm just so pleased by your willingness to serve the Council on Aging. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to speak with you last week, and I look forward to working with you at the Council on Aging. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. All right. Item number 2.
The City Council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of the total grant funds in the amount of $25,000 from the Mass Development Technical Assistance Grant to the Department of Planning and Economic Development Technical Assistance Grant Fund. These grant funds will be used to assist the city to study and develop a business improvement district and plan for downtown Brockton. Invited Robert May, Director of Planning and Economic Development, and Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Good evening, councilors. How are you?
Good evening.
I want to get feedback. I'm here to request the acceptance of a grant from Mass Development in the amount of $25,000, and I don't know why I'm getting feedback. It's my personality, I guess. We are going to be working with the Downtown Brockton Association and several of the property owners to prepare a feasibility study for a business improvement district in downtown. So if the feasibility study works, we will come back to you all potentially with a petition from the property owners who would be interested in creating a bid. A bid is a special assessment that the property owners put on themselves, and then it is segregated into a special pool that only the bid board can work on. So it's not something that the city can snatch the money and use it for however it pleases. The bid board of directors, in association with the bid plan that would be adopted, determines how that money is being spent. So right now we are asking to do a feasibility study, and we hope to report back to you with positive findings.
All right. Councilors, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Mr. May. I sponsored this order, and I think it's a great idea to try to see if the businesses of downtown are interested in forming a bid. So just a few quick questions, and I know a lot of this is going to be figured out through the consultation process, and then it'll all be boiled down into a petition and a MOU about how they want to organize themselves. Correct. So quick question about the size of the district. Do we have I know that is also a thing that would be figured out through this process, but do we have any understanding right now? What are we looking at the size of this bid?
We're looking at an area that is probably from Warren Avenue to Commercial, east to west, and then from Spring Street south to probably the river, which is just south of White, on the south side.
Okay, and from, I mean, that's a sizable district, that's a lot of businesses in that area. So obviously there'd be some eventual vote of the members in whatever district that is determined. But if, and I believe it was 50% of the participants and up to 60% of the assessed value has to vote in favorably. I might not have those numbers right, but it's something to that effect. But
It was just reversed.
Reverse,
You got the right number?
okay.
Yes.
This is John Fay, he's the Senior Economic Development Planner in our office. And John, it was, again, it's 51% of the property owners and
60% of property
Property
owners,
owners.
51, representing 51% of
The assessed value of the district, okay. And welcome, John. We appreciate to have you on board. So if, say it passes and it meets the threshold, I'm assuming that even those who voted against it or did not wish to participate would be assessed the fee as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So from, again, the first step of this process is developing a steering committee. That steering committee would then put together, some ideas in which they would pitch to the district. Do we have a timeline on when we expect a vote to happen?
We hope to have a kickoff meeting for the study the first week of February, assuming that we have a positive recommendation tonight. It should take about 6 months to put together the study and recommendation, and that will put us in position that we could begin the solicitation process to make sure that we have the signatures that accompany the petition back to City Council, because it will ultimately be City Council who decides whether or not we develop a diff or not, or a bid or not, excuse me.
Now, is there an expectation that the $25,000 grant would be able to get us to the point of ultimately voting on this issue, or is there an expectation the city would have to provide funds for that process too?
I think we should be able to get all the way through that process, or it puts us in line for another mass development grant to finish the process if we need to.
Okay. And just for the public's information, what type of services would be contemplated in the bid?
I think the first thing that, in speaking with the Downtown Brockton Association, they would love to have some full-time management that organizes, make sure they get communications out to all the property owners, the residents, the business owners. We're looking at things like an ambassadors program that does the clean, green, public safety, not like the police, but, roving ambassadors that check in on businesses and guests that we have downtown. They might sponsor festivals and events, other activities that bring people downtown. You'll see in downtown Boston, there's several bids in the city of Boston, but the downtown bid is crossing, is it Grand Crossing? Downtown Crossing. Sorry, I guess it's not as grand. But it is very successful in hosting events and bringing people to their businesses so that people will shop and stay and spend dollars in Boston. So we would do the same thing here.
Well, I think it's a great program. I think those services are, really needed in our downtown area, and it'd be good to have the business owners kind of direct how some of this money's spent and, provide services which they think is necessary for that area. So it puts a little more, stewardship in their own hands. So
It's direct management of their district, yes.
yeah. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. May. John, welcome. Sorry, what was your last name?
Fay, F-A-Y.
F-A-Y, Mr. Fay. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Azak, followed by Councillor Farwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. May. Just a couple of questions. Is there a match for this grant? I don't know if that was
There
already
is no
asked.
match required.
It's a no-match grant. And I know you said Downtown Brockton Association. Did you mean the Downtown Business Association?
Actually, it's the Downtown Brockton
Oh,
Association.
so it's Downtown Brockton. So that's the group that meets,
That's the group that had been led by John Marion.
yes, and now Mary
And is
Waldron.
now temporarily being led by Mary Waldron.
Okay, so it's the Downtown Brockton Association.
Yes.
Okay, very good. The last question I'm going to ask is, we seem to do a lot of studies, and, which is great, and, you know, I can name a few, like the restaurant incubator, and just to name one of them. The other one is the two-way on Main Street, which comes up on a daily basis. And I don't want to go off track, but where are we? Where are we with the two-way Main Street?
Well, we have been working with an engineering firm that then Commissioner Rowley and I had vetted. They have proposals into the city. What we're trying to do is find federal dollars to fund those proposals. We had made applications to the Economic Development Administration and to the U.S. Department of Transportation. Those bids were not successful in securing the funds. Some of these may be ARPA-eligible activities, and so we have a ARPA task force that meets weekly, where we try to prioritize what funding is available and how best to allocate it.
Okay, which is great. So the reason I bring this up is because obviously we're doing a study for the public safety facility that's on Warren Ave, and the traffic study that was presented to the Traffic Commission doesn't make any sense, because obviously Main Street is still one way, and, you know, it's just, it looks like a big mess, and I would
They
like
both need to work together.
Yes, and that's what I asked. I asked if they had actually met with you to see how we can
Yes.
work together. So I would like to see that happen, because it doesn't make sense to work on do traffic studies, change the traffic up on Warren Ave, yet still have Main Street the way it is, and we've spent so much money on the studies for Main Street.
It would have been a phased project either way, but the public safety building necessitates the Warren Avenue acceleration in that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
welcome.
Chairman.
Councillor Farwell.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. May. Good evening,
evening, sir.
Mr. Fay. Have no problem with accepting the grant funds. Just a couple of preliminary questions. You identify a geographical area. If, in round figures, if 60% of the owners of the parcels in that area vote affirmatively to have a special fee, basically an extra tax, however
Yes.
you wish to, the other 40% would have no recourse, they would have to go along with it?
They would have to go along with it. I believe there is a time limit of, it's either 3 or 5 years that the bid is in existence, and they have to come back and renew the bid, and you still need the same number of property owners, and still need city council's approval to renew the bid.
So, and this, you mentioned a bid board. Would they decide what the assessment would be, like 2% of your real estate tax, or 5%, or who would set that amount?
The bid board would make that determination and recommendation to city council, and then city council would pass that.
Oh, so we would be the ones that would have to put the special assessment on people?
Well,
'Cause of the
yes.
tax.
Okay.
The state law requires the city council to approve a bid.
So, you know, and this is very preliminary, but a horse by any other definition is a horse. So isn't this really like a slight Proposition 2.5 override voted by a particular percentage of people in a geographical area, and the minority vote would have to go along with it? I mean,
I would defer to Mr. Clarkson about a 2.5 override. I don't think it serves the same purpose. Because it's a special assessment, although it's collected with the real estate taxes, it's not an actual real estate tax.
But it's money out of someone's pocket.
It is money out of somebody's pocket,
Money out of
yes.
someone's pocket. Well, it's going to be interesting. I thank you.
All right. Councilor Castro.
Thank you. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome, Mr. Fay. I was wondering, can you give me an idea of, I don't know, is this a new program?
BID's been around the state for at least 10 years.
10 years, okay.
The closest one to us is in Taunton, and they have a very successful downtown bid association in Taunton.
Do you have an idea of how much the owners pay? Is it a percentage, or do you have any idea on an annual basis?
It would be a levy of a percentage on their assessed value. So depending on how big a bid the group wants, it would be hard to say without knowing a proposed budget at this point in time.
Right.
Something like ambassador's service could cost maybe $300,000 a year. You think of a full-time manager at $60,000 to $70,000 a year. So you could be up to, $400,000. Then divide that by the assessed value in the city, and you get up, or in the district, and you would get a percentage.
And who comprises the bid board who sets these funds? Is that the steering committee that Ann?
There's the steering committee for the grant, but
Right.
the bid board would be elected by the property owners downtown,
From among them?
from among them,
So it's
yes.
peers?
Pardon me?
It's peers, they're peers?
Yes.
And is the assessor on that? Is the CFO on that?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Okay. And you mentioned that there's no match, but I note that in the memorandum of agreement, the city provides reasonable in-kind services, staff time, organization of meetings, location, and such.
Correct.
Okay. And so we are contributing to this.
Pardon me?
The city contributes to this.
Well, I mean, a couple hours here and there.
Right, but not, yeah, okay. Doesn't have to match the 25,000 or be a
Right.
percentage of it, I understand. And Ann McFarland Burke is the proposed consultant, and how was she chosen? Who made the decision?
The Mass Development has what they call a house doctors list,
Yes,
and they pull together some names that have been pre-qualified for this kind of work. Ann is at the top of her game. She's actually the head was the head of the bid in Springfield, and she's one of the top bid consultants in the state.
so we would be very fortunate to have her
We are
working
very
with us.
fortunate to have her.
That's great. And she talks about in her scope of services, she would create a steering committee that would include charitable organizations and local organizations. Okay. And also, I was wondering about, on the second page of her documentation, she says she'll create a draft MOU. What's an MOU?
A memorandum of understanding.
Okay, okay.
So it's for the group that is being formed, that they
Yes.
understand what their
So they-
roles and responsibilities are.
Okay. And I noticed that in the memorandum of understanding with Mass Development, that this lasts just until June 30th,
Yes,
but the reporting is for 5 years.
yes.
Why would that be?
That is
To
Mass
measure-
Development boilerplate.
To measure success?
It's to measure success, it's to make sure that, hold our feet to the fire. If we're still interested in this, we should be pursuing activities to implement the plan. And so, like with the other grants that we have from Mass Development, we owe them reports, and we have to retain documents to make sure the Commonwealth's money is well spent.
Worst-case scenario, would we ever have to pay this back?
No, ma'am.
That's good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Councillor Tavares.
Good evening. Thank you for
evening.
wanting to be here. I just have two questions. My first question is, who will draft the local petition if you get this grant? And
I anticipate the petition being drafted technically by the consultant and Burke, but with the input of the people who are on the steering committee, and that would include businesses and property owners downtown, and you know, potentially some nonprofits that are in the area that are also property owners.
okay. And my second question be, how will the property owner be informed of the business improvement for the street to petition? Like, you know, how they get informed to apply to get the access, and then.
Very good question, Regina. So the steering committee has, will be putting together a promotions campaign, and literally, it's going to be like an election campaign. They need to go door to door, making sure every property owner understands what's on here, because they need to physically sign a petition. So that requires a lot of communication with the property owners to make sure that something like this gets passed.
Okay, my last question will be like, you know, what will be the qualification for pre-qualify, for them to be pre-qualified?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What will be pre-qualification for them to be applied?
Fair
Okay.
qualification?
Yeah, pre-qualify, like, you know, how would they be pre-qualified? What's the requirement?
Oh, to create the bid?
Yes, yes.
We would need, and again, remind me, we would need the signatures of 60% of the property owners within the district, provided that they represent 61% of the assessed value. It's a tricky little formula, but it makes sure that the majority who may be small, part-time, you know, small property owners don't gang up on one large taxpayer. So it makes sure that we have a diversity of interests in the pot.
All right, thank you so much. That's all my questions.
All right. Councillor D'Agostino.
Hi, thank you. And so I was just wondering, and this kind of goes along the lines, I think, of where Councilor Farwell was asking, if you have 60% that vote in favor and the 40 that don't, obviously they have to pay it. Do we have, and I know it's early in the process, so I apologize for the question, but do we have any kind of an idea or gauge at all of what the interest is in this from the owners in that area?
We've talked to several property owners right now, including Trinity Financial, Jason Korb and Capstone Realty, Jeffrey,
Anatole.
thank you, Anatole, of South Shore Property Management, and Mary Waldron did have a local business meeting a couple of months ago. There were some problems over on Railroad Ave, and a lot of people property owners had expressed their interest in this, which gave us impetus to apply for the grant.
Okay. And the meeting that she had, were those owners more, you know, you talked about a lot of the bigger firms that own, you know, the bigger properties downtown. You know, do we have, did that meeting consist maybe of more smaller owners, you know, who may not be as financially well
That's
secured?
the next phase is, you know, now that we know that we've dipped our toe in the water, and it's time to create a campaign to speak with all the property owners so that everybody knows, not just, you know, 2 or 3 owners, but everybody has got to know what's going on.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Rodriguez.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. May,
Good evening,
to
sir.
be honest with you, this scares the daylights out of me. You're looking at a proposal that includes Warren Ave to commercial, Spring down to White. She basically said White Ave.
Yes.
There's a ton of properties that are owned by people that are seriously struggling to make ends meet in this community. But you know, the thing the fear that I have is that this thing will be run by, as it normally is in this city, by the tip of the iceberg, and then the lower portion of the iceberg will have to pay the piper for this particular project. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if you look at some of the businesses that you mentioned already, and you're looking at 60% of the assessed value of the district, that could be a handful of businesses in this area. Because if you look at Trinity, it's assessed for a lot more than probably what Warren Ave would be, minus Vicente, going all the way down Warren Ave. So one property can actually kind of overshadow the entire district. And yet, the poor people that actually own 3-deckers, 2-deckers, living in type of landlords are going to be forced to pay into this particular proposal. And that's what scares me. Because as it has been done in the past, there's a very good chance that the average Joe is not going to be part of this process, at least to be able to say, I agree with this or I disagree with that. Because we normally have a small number of people making a decision for the vast majority of us in this community. And that's what ends up happening. And this is the way I'm going to see this going as well.
The formula that is in the state legislation is set up to prevent exactly that from happening. Because even though you have one company, yes, one property owner could own 61% of the assessed value downtown, but it still requires 50% of the total property owners downtown to support the ordinance. Okay. So to support the petition. So if you don't have that 50%, when that comes before City Council, you haven't made the mark. And I think during this planning process is also a time to talk about governance. How do we make sure that we have small property owners and large property owners on the board making those decisions? So that's something that we can take care of during this plan.
So there's basically no distinction between the property owner. It could be somebody who owns a two-family or somebody that owns Trinity properties.
This is on commercial property or large multifamily. So the single house that is single-family home that's on Cottage Avenue, it is not included in the assessment value. It is not part of wouldn't be paying into the diff. Or the bid, excuse me.
But if somebody owns a three-family, then they would be assessed a fee to pay for this thing?
I would have to look at the language exactly on where that line gets drawn.
Because that would make a difference. You know, because if we're asking, one of the things that I see happening in this community a lot is, for instance, we ask, there's this major concern with rental assistance, but we've got a lot of people in our community within Brockton, they're homeowners, and they live on the 3-deckers as part of their family base, and they rent a couple of the properties above them. So they're owner-occupied property owners. Mm-hmm. So when we hear people just kind of bashing landlords, these folks are kind of tenants themselves because they live in those properties. So it's not a fair process when we sit here and say, we're not talking about the same thing, but we're saying we need to assist people with rental assistance and forget the homeowner who's also struggling just to make ends meet based on what he or she has to pay for it. So this is the situation that we run into if you have a 3-decker where it's owner occupied. We need to make sure that those people are either excluded from this process because it really doesn't count as, you can't look at somebody who owns a 3-decker and say, well, you are in the same boat as Trinity properties, or some of the other larger units that we have in the downtown area. So I think we have to make that distinction very clear to make sure that we let people know that, one, if you live on your single-family, two-decker or whatever, you're not part of this process. You're not going to be assessed any sort of, the two and a half, because technically it's a new form of taxation, no matter what you call it, it's going to be taxation. And you're going to have to show individuals that their benefits will outweigh their cost. Because what's the sense of paying into this bid if there's basically very little benefits for them?
Well, and that's the whole planning process, is they have to lay out a program that is beneficial to everyone in the district and that is worth their while to participate in.
Yeah, because, and as my last point, several years ago, there was a program here in the city where we had some funding and we needed to survey the community what their needs were. The people that were surveyed answered that survey and said, yeah, we need to have cell phones so we can communicate with the police. Come to find out that the areas that they actually use, very few people spoke English. And yet the ones that actually answered the survey were the very few people that said, yeah, I want a cell phone to talk to the police. But at the time, we didn't even have the vast majority of the police that we have nowadays. So it depends who you're talking to in terms of getting the answers from the individuals that best serve that area. So I want to make sure that we are very inclusive in this, that we don't just grab, again, the same characters that we normally get to participate in this particular thing and then saddle the community with this bill later on, because we're the ones who are going to have to pay for it, to be honest with you, in terms of putting up with the abuse that we're going to get from the community once they start getting some assessment in their direction, in a sense. So we can't be asking people to participate in something that they have very little say on it and then be assessed something on top of that. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that stuff, because, like I said, it scares the daylights out of me where we don't have everything basically put out there so we know the differences between what kind of businesses we're talking about, the level of businesses, so that we know that some, again, Trinity isn't going to come in and plow everybody over based on what they want done with those resources that are generated after the fact, that they all have a say, but it's at least that they are also playing in the process.
Yes.
Is what I have a fear of, that I hope that we make sure that we kind of stay on and deal with that stuff. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Councillor Minicello.
Good evening, Mr. May. Thank you for attending. Just as a follow-up with regard to Councillor Rodriguez, there obviously is a large distinction between a professional landlord who has several multi-family units, some of them in the hundreds, and your owner-occupied small landlord who has a one unit in a two-family or 2 units in a 3-family. So I respect what he was saying in terms of making sure the checks and balances are in place so that the small landlord, the family man or woman or person is not going to be assessed a fee that is really benefiting the professional landlords and the big players in the city, at their expense. So I respect that, and I'm sure you'll watch that checks and balances and process throughout the throughout the grant, so to speak, the life of the grant. I just was wondering how following up on Councillor D'Agostino, how did this all originate? Can you just tell us about the process when you see, or how does this grant get identified and someone decides, your office or whomever, hey, this is something that we need to reach out to the community on, this could be really good. Can you just define the process for myself as a new councillor, as well as the people at home that aren't familiar with the process?
Okay. The discussion about bids began a long time ago, back when, long before COVID, with the Downtown Brockton Association, then under John Marion, had begun discussing how do we create some sort of professional entity to manage downtown. So bid is one of those ways of producing that. We also then participated with the state in what they call the Rapid Local Recovery Local Rapid Recovery, LRRP program, planning program. That plan is on our website. And one of the state's recommendations was that we should be creating some sort of downtown entity to manage downtown with us. And that led us to then apply for this grant at about the same time that that study was being discussed. So we have this opportunity now before us to really put forward a proposal that was started maybe in 2016 or 17 when we created the Downtown Action Strategy and have been discussing all the way through the development process that we've gone through downtown. It's been a while.
Thank you. Again, just stressing what Councillor Rodriguez was saying, you know, I see his fear about the usual suspects, the big players in the city having the ability to sort of get this program to benefit themselves as opposed to, you know, the smaller landlords, the smaller homeowners who are just trying to, you know, make ends meet. If they don't make one payment on their mortgage, they're in a lot of trouble, and they don't need an extra burden placed on them that's not going to really benefit them, but yet, you know, benefit a big player in town. So I'm sure you'll now after this discussion tonight, that'll be on your radar screen. So I appreciate what you had to say, and yes, I'm glad that we had this opportunity to sort of vet this issue from a number of different perspectives.
Thank you.
All right. Councillor Mendez, and then we have a couple of councillors who have other questions.
Hello, how are you? So as it's been stated here tonight, communication is the key in this project, especially in this district, which people are not very responsive, hard to read population. So you're planning to do multiple public hearings and the literature in several different languages.
Oh, yes.
How is all of that approached? Because what happens is that people don't really pay much attention. They're busy, and then they are just hit with this new thing, and then it's already. So I'm hoping that we're not opening a can of worms here with people just going to be upset with us with this whole changing. So how is all that going to be?
I understand that, and that they will be upset with everybody if they aren't getting what they want. But the study area is drawn large. It's not necessarily what the diff or the bid boundaries will be. That's going to be determined by the study committee and how many signatures that we're getting out of this process, because the property owners, are petitioning you, the city council, to vote in favor of a special assessment on their properties. So there's a couple of different safeguards there. You know, obviously we need to have a certain number of signatures, but the plan that comes before you has to be fair for everyone that's in the district. And in order to do that, there needs to be an outstanding communication effort, multiple languages, hundreds of meetings, no, not hundreds, but dozens of meetings with the property owners. And, you know, it may take a while to get this done, but we need to do it right if it's going to survive. Some bids don't get passed on the first go-round, but if you put together the right plan that is inclusive and fair, then you have a document that is beneficial to everybody in the community, everybody that's in the district, and everybody's contributing something to the district, then I think it's beneficial for the city council to consider that.
And you'll keep us informed every step of the way how this progresses.
Yes,
I hope you're correct. Thank you. Yes, I know.
All right. We've got a couple of councillors who have spoken before who would like to speak. Is there any councillor who has yet to speak who would like to go before that? Nope. All right. Councillor Thompson, followed by Councillor Nicastro.
Again, good evening. So just quickly, when this matter eventually comes back before us for our vote, is this an up or down vote, or do we have an opportunity to amend, or in your understanding of that process?
I will have to get back to you on that. As part of the study process, I'll have some more answers for you. I would assume because it's the property owners who are deciding what is in the plan that they are then contributing to through a special assessment, it may just be an up or down vote. But certainly I would expect the two ward councilors from that represent downtown to be a part of the study process.
Well, it's
Congratulations.
Funny. Well, it's right. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because actually that was going to be my recommendation to include myself and Councilor Tavares on the steering committee so that we can be informed of the process, and then that way, instead of just you being a liaison, you'll have city councilors can also be a liaison to this council, and then keep them informed of the process and the ultimate product.
I think that that's been a very positive process that we've had for the Public Safety Committee, Public Safety Building with Councilor Farwell, and I know Councilor Asak served on it when she was council president. I know Councilor President Lally will be involved in this also. So always having a local rep in that process is very important.
Great. Well, I appreciate that, and I volunteer to be a part of it. Thank you, Mr. May. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Councilor Castro.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I've been perusing the memorandum with Mass Development as you spoke to the other councilors, and I don't see the information I'm looking for. So perhaps we would all benefit from your clarifying for us, perhaps by Friday, what would happen if you owned a three-family? Are you subject to this, or what are the parameters? Or is there a threshold?
I'll get that information for you, Councilor, and I'll distribute it to,
That would be
to
swell.
everyone. But it's residential properties, 1, 2, 3, and I think even 4, but I know 1, 2, 3s aren't included in this.
That would be swell. Thank you.
I'll get that
Thank you,
for you.
Mr. Chair.
All right.
If that's everybody, I'll make a motion to approve, recommend favorably to the full
Second.
city council.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? All right.
Thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, item number 3.
Order that the city council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of the total grant funds in the amount of $74,800 from the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, 2021 BJA Fiscal 21 Edward Burney Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, JAG, to the Brockton Police Department 2021 BJA Fiscal 21 Edward Burney Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, JAG Fund. These grant funds will be used to conduct community policing overtime, send youth to the Plymouth County District Attorney's Office summer day camp, and purchase taser, non-lethal weapons, batteries, cartridges, and holsters to properly equip patrol officers. There is no match required for this grant. Invited Steve Williamson, Interim Chief of Police, Michelle St. James, Grant Coordinator, Brockton Police Department, and Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
How are you?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Mr. Chair. Good evening, councilors. Congratulations to the new councilors. This is the JAG grant. It's a long-standing federal grant that is based on crime rates, both in the state and in the city. And Brockton is Brockton has its own allocation, but because Plymouth County does not receive funds itself, it makes this a disparate jurisdiction because there are 3 other towns in the county that also receive funds just at a much lower level. Brockton the police department uses this more for equipment now because in the last few years, we've been lucky enough to receive more funding for community policing, and there are very few grants that allow us to purchase necessary equipment. That's why you'll see that the vast majority of this allocation is going toward the use to beef up our non-lethal force, and also to send kids to the summer day camp, assuming COVID eventually ends. But if there are any questions?
Councilor Azak, followed by Councilor Castro.
Thank you, Ms. St. James. So it already states there's no match to this grant, and it looks like it covers a lot of, different aspects. And I wasn't aware of that the DA, the Plymouth County DA had a summer camp for youth, which is really great. Where is that? Is that Brockton youth or just?
It's youth from throughout the county, and it used to be a DARE camp, but now it's been expanded a little bit more. And they haven't had it, obviously, the last couple of summers, but we put it in, hopeful that next year they'll have it again.
Hopefully we will. We'll be praying. So that's great. Thank you for all you do. And I did want to recognize and congratulate our interim police chief who's in the chamber, Officer,
Williams.
Police Chief Williams. So congratulations and thank you for being here this evening.
All right, Councilor Castro.
Thank you. Good evening, Attorney St. James. I'm just wondering, as we discussed earlier, who decides the percentage of these funds? It's $127,159 to Plymouth County. And who decides what the percentage is that will go to Brockton?
This is a Bureau of Justice Assistance grant, and it is a formula grant, which means that Congress, when they drafted this, set a particular formula. They call it a four-step formula, but technically it's five, because the first step is that during the federal budgeting process, they have to determine what amount of money is available for JAG funding. So once that's been determined, then an initial JAG allocation for each state is determined based equally on its share of violent crime and population. So even if, say, Alabama had, an 80% crime rate, it doesn't. But just say it did, it wouldn't get as much as, say, California. If California, say, had a 3% crime rate, it doesn't, just because they would also weight the population in there. And so once they've done that, the next step is that they then make sure that your state gets above the minimum level, and Massachusetts does. And so then they look at it and they split the funding for the state 60-40. So the state gets 60% of the funding, and you'll see that in pass-through grants that we get for traffic or other justice initiatives. And then 40% goes to what's called the local solicitation. And so then they look at 3-year crime rates, violent crime rates in Massachusetts, and cities and towns then get a local allocation based on that. Brockton happens to have one of the higher violent crime rates in the state, so we are allocated one of the higher JAG amounts. Now, again, because as I said, we're a disparate jurisdiction in Plymouth County, so we're given this amount, but Plymouth County, who runs this grant, could determine not to give Brockton the amount it's awarded. It has discretion. We're lucky in that Plymouth County abides by what the Bureau of Justice Assistance determines with its formula, although they do take 10% of our award for administrative purposes.
Okay. And I noticed from the budget summary that's in here somewhere, the lion's share of the funds, as you mentioned, do go to equipment, about $62,000. Can you give me an idea of how many tasers that will purchase?
Yes, it will purchase 35 tasers at a cost of $1,299. That's what our quote was at the time. The price may go up, but we're looking to get 35 tasers, 70 taser batteries, 35 holsters, and 250 cartridges.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Councilor Rodriguez.
Yeah, just a quick question. Ms. St. James, you know that our population has increased as far as the census are concerned?
I'm sorry?
Our population as a city has increased since the census numbers came out. Have you noticed that, whether or not that's making a difference in some of the grants that
It is much too early to tell. These are based on older numbers. They're looking at crime rates, I believe, that ended in 2019, so that's the population they're also working on for these numbers. We'll start to see the population for fiscal year 23 for state grants, and hopefully we'll see some of that in federal grants this spring. I haven't seen any of the solicitations yet, but we'll start to see it.
And also, when Chief Gomes was here, a couple months ago, one of the things that I actually had brought up was the fact that I found out that our folks, police officers in the department, do not have their personal tasers.
Correct.
That they share taser. Now,
Yes.
I actually had told Chief Gomes that with all this, ARPA funds and some of these funds, that Recovery Act monies that we actually had gotten, that just because of COVID and sharing equipment, it would make sense that, we've got, 170 sworn officers in the police force. What would it take to purchase 170 tasers for the police department?
Well, let's see, it's $45,000 for 35, so, I mean, we could do it under $250,000. And if that were something that City Council wanted to spend money on, the one nice thing about the JAG grant is that you can amend it. You can amend the budget. So if you did that, then I would want to make an amendment after speaking to people in the police department to probably buy radios instead, because we're behind the times in terms of our radios in the station also.
But right, but again, if we're going through this whole COVID uprise and craziness that we're going through, this is an opportunity that it makes sense. It's common sense that we should not be asking a second shift officer to pass on his taser to an oncoming third shift guy. It makes absolutely no sense.
I agree.
And we're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on the dumbest things that you can think of, and yet these poor guys and ladies in the department are sharing something that they're constantly touching. They're constantly touching it. So
Yes.
That makes no sense. And we've got Mr. CFO sitting right here that, do you remember through the chair, Mr. Clarkson, do you remember me bringing that up? Did you guys, again, through the chair, did you, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind?
He's on the item.
Is he?
He's an invited guest.
Can I just ask you, Mr. CFO, whether or not that actually had gotten anywhere in terms of equipping the officers with the tasers?
Good evening. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'll have to go back, Councillor, and I know that there have been specific additional allocations for funding for equipment, but as I stand here tonight, I don't know the exact answer to those specific officers. So I'll get that information and get it back to you.
Yeah, it's not specific officers. I think what happened is that they don't have enough for all the men and women in the department. That is correct. So and we brought that up when Chief Gomes was here to say, what would it take to equip every single member of the police force with a taser that they use perhaps a lot more than their service revolver? That we need to do that, and I think we've got the funds to do it. And it's to me, it's almost embarrassing to say, oh, by the way, here, this is a Class A city, and we're passing, equipment from one officer to the other as they're going off shift. That just makes absolutely no sense.
I do remember that discussion, Councillor, and one of the things we talked about after that was putting together a budget request for fiscal year 23, which starts in July, to adequately address that issue.
Can we address that before July, since they should be hitting the streets during the summer months prepared to do their job?
What we certainly can do now that we're halfway through the year, one of the things that we do, as you know, is assess the status of the budget every year halfway through. We actually do it throughout the year and take a look at where in the budget there's money that could be transferred within the budget. And in fact, the last item on your agenda tonight is just such an adjustment in the fire department. So what I can certainly commit to you is that I'll sit down with the acting chief this week, take a look at where we are in the budget. I don't know, but I'm sure Ms. St. James and Captain Williamson know what the specific amount it is that it would take to make that sort of purchase, and then we can review that with the mayor.
Yeah, I seriously would appreciate it, and trust you me, I'm not the one that's basically saying this. You've got officers in the police department saying, I can't believe that they're actually asking me to do this. So that's why I'm kind of sharing that with you, and I hope that you understand that and you can kind of move forward with this stuff so that we don't have to wait until the end of the fiscal year. Besides, I had a conversation with somebody downstairs, and they told me that the city is swimming in cash. So if the city is swimming in cash, we should not have a problem purchasing these items for the police officer.
Fair enough,
Thank you, Mr.
understood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Farwell.
Just a quick question for Chief Williamson. Do we have a mandated order that you have to carry a taser? Have we negotiated that with the union and they've agreed to it?
It is not a mandate. I don't know how many tasers we have, but we like it's been discussed, they get signed out in patrol. We're trying to get guys up to speed with their training. They get certified every so often, but we do not have a mandate that someone will take a taser out.
Isn't that something you'd have to negotiate with the union, though, if you're going to mandate that, because now you have training?
It might be something we have to, if we're going to assign one to every officer, it might be a discussion with the unions. I don't think it'll be a roadblock, but it might be, that need to be discussed.
And then the last thing and we didn't have those when I was on the department, but you'd probably have to provide the officer with some type of a secure storage box for a taser. Unlike a firearm where you can put a trigger lock in or disassemble it, I wouldn't want to have them just take these home and leave them around and not have a secure area.
Huh?
Well, that's an interesting point. We don't provide them with storage for their firearms.
Right.
They
But state law says you have to.
They have to store.
Have to, so you don't have, but I don't know.
I think a while back we provided trigger locks, but most officers went out and purchased their own.
But I don't think there's a mandated storage procedure for a taser, and I just wouldn't want to have 180 of these things scattered throughout wherever people live and not have a secure area for it.
Right. I understand your point. It's something we'd have to look into. We'll have to see what other departments do, try to find the right policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes.
Ordered that the city council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of the total grant funds in the amount of $250,000 from the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security's Office of Grants and Research, Massachusetts Municipal Public Safety Staffing Grant to the Brockton Fire Department, Massachusetts Municipal Public Safety Staffing Grant Fund. These grant funds will be used for overtime necessary to maintain staffing levels. Invited Brian Nardelli, Fire Chief, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Chief, how you doing?
Good evening, councilors. I apologize. Real quick, so this is a, if I can make a quick statement, councilors, thank you for having me. This is a reoccurring grant that we've actually received each year. Helps to keep our staffing up. It runs calendar year. It is for $250,000. A few years back, we started out with a much less amount. Again, just like Ms. St. James said, we're a little behind, unfortunately, with the census, to your point, Councilor. And hopefully, we put in every year for more money, and they've kind of kept us in check at about $250,000. This grant is not a match grant. It is for us to accept. It is audited. It is used for staffing of apparatus strictly to make sure the apparatus is staffed. It has nothing to do with any other components that go on in the Brockton Fire Department in regards to fire prevention, any of those things. A number of towns do receive this grant. We've been very lucky in not having any issues with it over the years in receiving this grant. If you have any questions.
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
All right, motion's made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes.
Oh, you just step back for a minute and then step back up.
Ordered that the following name sum B and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $800,000 from the Brockton Fire Department Personal Services other than overtime to Brockton Fire Department Personal Services overtime. This transfer is necessary to supplement overtime spending due to vacations, increased members on injured leave, vacant positions, and a new collective bargaining agreement. Invited Brian Nardelli, Fire Chief, and Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Oh, Chief, how you doing?
Good evening again, Mr. Chairman and councilors. So we've seen an increase over this past year in injuries. A lot of this is unfortunately compounded by the pandemic and the situation, getting people to doctor's appointments. We've actually had a number of members who have had their elective surgeries. Unfortunately, they are elective surgeries that our department depends on. So our number of injured members is much higher with regular injuries than normal. Approximately 4 weeks ago, we had upwards of 42 members out on COVID as well. This has compounded our problem even greater. Right now, our current overtime budget is at approximately $136,000 and change. That, at the rate we're going, will be expended in about 3 weeks. We're hoping, with the graduating class of these 13 members that we just had, as well as the COVID numbers, from what I'm understanding through the media and everything I read, are starting to go back down, that hopefully we'll be able to level off a little bit. We never spend this amount of money this time of the year. No one's going on vacation. We don't have any staffing issues. But because of our current injuries, and unfortunately the compounding with the pandemic of that has really hurt our overtime budget. I've been working with Chief Financial Officer Clarkson over the past number of weeks, because we've been watching trends with this. I have a comparison I've been using to 2 years ago, not last year, because last year is not a good barometer for what we've been trying to accomplish in budgeting our money in overtime. Using it 2 years ago, and I saw us slowly increasing the amount of money. We were beyond that in the red up until this point. So again, along with CFO Clarkson and Tiffany in the budget office, we've been watching this closely. We figured this was about the time we'd be ready to probably have to pull the trigger to transfer some money around to get it into that overtime budget to keep the apparatus staffed. As you can see the other night, in a 3-alarm fire in the center of the city, every piece of apparatus was there. This job is all about staffing and all about members with boots on the ground doing that job. And if we're unable to do that, especially in these times, in these cold weather days and nights, that is, it's imperative that we have that staffing there. Right now, they're at a working fire on Tilton Ave. That's why I apologize for my unattentiveness in the last segment here. I was talking to a few people that were there. So I think this money is able to be moved. We've done an analysis along with CFO Clarkson and his staff to see what we could move, where we could move it to get us through until July. Any questions?
Motion to recommend favor.
Second.
All right, motion made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. 2 for 2, Chief. All right, are there any moments of councilor's recognition? Councilor Azak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to let everybody at home know that Brockton Public Schools Human Resources Department is seeking to hire dedicated and caring adults to serve as community allies for Brockton High School. There's full-time and part-time positions available. Obviously, there will be all kinds of training and an application process. So the Brockton Public School parents, guardians, BHS alumni are strongly encouraged to apply for these positions. The application is online at bpsma.org, and the phone number to the Brockton Public Schools Human Resource Office is 508-580-7535. I think this is a great opportunity for parents and BHS alumni to get involved with Brockton High School and Brockton Public Schools. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of our discussion earlier regarding the bid revolved around the DBA, the Downtown Business Association, and the Brockton Downtown Business Association, and some of the things that they'll be controlling. And so I just wanted to make mention that the first meeting of 2022's Downtown Brockton Association will be meeting tomorrow, January 19th, from 11:30 to 12:30 p.m. It's going to be held virtually. If you wanted to join that, you please go to dbabrockton.org to get your link. Secondly, there is also an opportunity to attend in person, and that will be at, I believe it's 60 Church Street School Street. 60 School Street, which is the Edison building right next to us. So that meeting is going to be held both in person and virtually. If anybody's interested in participating, please visit dbabrockton.org. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Seeing no other points of recognition, we are adjourned.